We're still going at it. We're going to keep going until we finish all this material. It's driving me crazy. But here we are. So we're no longer talking about intrinsic regulation, are we now? No. We're going to start talking about extrinsic regulation. So I do want to go back to one of those things, something that I mentioned at the beginning of this section of the course. It's pretty remarkable when we think about there's 800,000 to 1.2 million of these nephrons in our kidneys. Each of them are self-regulatory. They each can regulate glomerular filtration rate on their own. It is awesome when you think about that, how that works. But, having said that, even when the mean arterial pressure is within the autoregulatory range, the GFR can be changed by extrinsic mechanisms. Why? Because the health or the well-being of the entire body overrides sometimes the kidneys' needs to regulate GFR. So one of the factors that can regulate GFR extrinsically is sympathetic nervous activity. Now, this is primarily mediated by increased sympathetic input to the afferent arterioles. Remember, does the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system provide any input to arterioles? Niet, comrade, niet. We do not have parasympathetic here. Only sympathetic. We are very sympathetic in the kidney. That's right. Very, very sympathetic. So, keep that in mind. And this is going to bring about long-term blood pressure regulation, which we're going to see how that happens. Remember, parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system has no major influence on GFR. Okay? So, this is a flow chart. Get the joke? We're talking about GFR and urine flow chart. Get it? Anyways. And on this side, we're going to be looking at short-term regulation of blood pressure. And on the right side of this flow chart, we're going to be looking at mechanisms of long-term regulation of blood pressure. So let's zoom in and let's take a look at short-term regulation. So let's say we get a drop in MAP. All right, so some factor leads to a drop in mean arterial pressure. Well, we've said in the cardiovascular section, especially in lab, that this is detected by baroreceptors, located where receptors? In your aortic arch and in the carotid bodies. They send information to the cardiovascular control center, and if the mean arterial pressure falls below the reference input, then you get an increase in sympathetic activity. We're going to say that this can lead to a general constriction of the arterioles. All right, so we're going by a real basic thing here. We're just going to assume we're just hitting alpha 1 everywhere. Okay, so just stick with me on this. Increasing sympathetic activity. We know that this is going to increase cardiac output. You get increased venoconstriction, which leads to increased venous return, increased end diastolic volume, stroke volume, cardiac output, as well as by activating the SA and AV nodes, we increase heart rate. Both of those lead to an increase in cardiac output. And if I constrict most of my arterioles, I'm also going to increase TPR. So mean arterial pressure is the product of cardiac output and total peripheral resistance. So if I increase both of these, I'm going to increase MAP. That's simple. That's review. That's short-term adjustment. So let's zoom out on our graph now and let's focus on constricting the arterioles in the kidneys. Because remember, the afferent arteriole, is it an arteriole? Last time I checked, arterioles were arterioles. So this is an arteriole. So guess what? It's an arteriole. We constrict the afferent arteriole. This is going to reduce glomerular blood flow, increase GFR. We've done that a gazillion times. How's this going to impact long-term regulation of mean arterial pressure? So check this out. If I reduce GFR, if I reduce the rate at which water and solutes move from the plasma into the tubular component, and then end up moving through those tubular components, this has the potential to reduce urine volume. So here, what the system is trying to do is it's trying to prevent fluid loss through the urine. So when it's doing that, what we're going to conclude is that a consequence of losing less fluid through the urine is to increase what's called extracellular fluid volume. This includes plasma. Plasma is extracellular fluid. It's kind of counterintuitive because we're still losing some volume in the urine. I understand what some of your you may have a problem with or struggle with that concept, but we're going to try to keep this very, very simple. If I lose less volume in my urine, a consequence of that is the body is trying to increase extracellular fluid volume, and that's going to lead to an increase in MAP. Why? Because if I increase my extracellular fluid volume, I can then increase venous return, end diastolic volume, stroke volume, cardiac output. You with me? Okay. This is a long-term adjustment for a drop in mean arterial pressure. Another mechanism, extrinsic mechanism, is the contraction of podocytes. So here are foot processes of podocytes. Here's our basement membrane, glomerular basement membrane. Here are the glomerular endothelial cells. The top cartoon is showing you podocytes relaxed. The bottom cartoon is showing you podocytes when they are contracted. If I contract the podocytes, I reduce GFR. Why? Because it's harder for the water and solutes to squeeze through these filtration slits, which are now much more narrow. So this is going to reduce the rate at which water and solutes move from the plasma in the glomerular capillaries into Bowman's capsule. And when the podocytes are relaxed, this can lead to an increase in GFR. So what would happen if I had increased GFR? I lose more fluid through the urine, which would then lead to a reduction in blood volume, a reduction in extracellular fluid volume, venous return, end diastolic volume, stroke volume, cardiac output, MAP. And if I'm reducing my GFR, as we just said when we were talking about long-term mechanisms that regulate mean arterial pressure, if I reduce the GFR, I'm now losing less fluid through the urine. A consequence of that is an increase in extracellular fluid volume, increase in venous return, end diastolic volume, stroke volume, cardiac output, and MAP. And the relaxation or contraction of podocytes, it occurs by an unknown physiological mechanism. But the main thing I want you to take away from this is that if I increase GFR, I'm going to lose more fluid through the urine. I'm going to reduce blood volume, reduce cardiac output, and MAP. If I reduce GFR, I'm going to lead to an increase in blood volume, cardiac output, and MAP. Got it? Hopefully I didn't completely confuse everything. So, here we are. That's our third video. Let's keep moving, because now that we've talked about filtration, now we want to talk about reabsorption. Yo!